Hello everyone, I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to this week's Chrestman Conversation. I don't know if you can hear it already, but I have a little bit of laryngitis, so it's a little bit annoying to have to talk. So this podcast might be a bit abbreviated. I haven't decided yet. We'll see how long I can ramble without becoming too annoyed at the sound of my own voice. One of the other reasons it's going to be abbreviated is because this week, once again in the news, the Donald Trump impeachment has just dominated the news cycle. And since we covered it last week, I don't want to do it 2 weeks in a row. There haven't been any gigantic updates that I feel everyone needs to be made aware of. They're still going to go through the investigation. They're still going to do all the nonsense. So until something revelatory comes up, we're not going to touch it again on this podcast. So we're going to do something a little different this week instead. This past week, I received a number of questions, some really great questions actually this week. And I decided what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a special episode this week. Instead of covering a news topic, we're going to talk about something that maybe people just need a little information on, and hopefully that's what this podcast will be, a little informative about something that a lot of people don't understand. So we're going to talk about the Electoral College. It's going to be real fun. The goal is going to be to address why we have the Electoral College, how it works, and then discuss whether or not it's a good thing for American politics. To start with, most people are not aware that in November of an election year, when you go to vote and you cast your ballot, you are not actually voting for the President and Vice President of the United States. Instead, what you're doing is voting for one of your state's electors. This is the first phase of the presidential election. On Election Day, there are 51 popular elections held, one in every state and one in Washington, D.C. Who are these electors that you're voting for? Well, they can be almost anyone. The Constitution does not list a lot of rules or prohibitions around electors. Sometime before the election, each party in each state will nominate a slate of electors to represent them at the convention. The laws and the way that this is done vary state to state, but each political party will pick their own people. In phase 2 of the presidential election, all the electors that we all just voted for meet up at a convention, which happens in December, and then they vote. They vote for the President of the United States. Each state's electors vote for whoever won the popular vote in their state, except for Nebraska and Maine, whose electors vote proportionally according to the percentage each candidate received in their state. So basically, the electors in December all meet up. If, for example, Donald Trump won the state that you live in, then the electors that the Republican Party had picked prior to the election get sent to the convention, and they all vote for Donald Trump for president. That's basically how that works. Now, the amount of electors that each state gets is determined by the U.S. Census. The census, which is taken every 10 years, tells the government how many people live in each state. Also has a lot of various other things that it's used for, but this big one is to determine the population size of each state, and then this data is used to distribute representation in the government accordingly. As everyone is probably aware, every state has 2 senators, regardless of population or size of the state, while the representation in the House of Representatives is based on the population size of your state. The number of representatives in the House of Representatives has been capped at 435, so the distribution of representation is based around this number. So proportionally, however much percentage of the population of the United States are held in your state, you get that proportional number of the 435 representatives available to Congress. Again, this is done every 10 years. The amount of electors your state gets is the amount of representatives in the House plus the 2 senators. So take, for example, Missouri, which is where I live. Missouri has 8 members in the House of Representatives and 2 senators, which means that Missouri has 10 electoral votes that we get to cast for president. The number of electors in am I saying that word funny? Electors. The number of electors is 538. So this is the amount of people, the 435 from the House, plus 100 senators, plus Washington, D.C. also has 3 that they get as well, which brings us to 538. This means that the magic number to win the presidency is 270. You need to get 270 electoral votes to win the presidency of the United States. So that's basically a little overview on what the Electoral College is. But now we're going to talk about why the Electoral College exists in the first place. Now, why did the Founding Fathers decide to structure our government in that way? To a lot of people, it seems very convoluted. Would it not be simpler if people just voted for the president directly, and then whoever gets more votes wins the presidency? That would be a very direct way to do it. So the short answer is yes, it would be much simpler if people just voted for the president, and whoever won the majority won the presidency. The long answer is that it may be simpler, but it is a terrible idea. The Founding Fathers were incredibly well educated on the history of governments. If you read the founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, any of the writings of the Founding Fathers in general, the one thing that you'll find that is a constant thread among them is the idea that the people need to be protected from a tyrannical government. So that is the entire premise of all of those documents. When you read the Bill of Rights, for example, the Bill of Rights doesn't grant you rights. The Bill of Rights prevents the government from taking your rights, which you were born with, is basically the view of the Founding Fathers. You're granted these God-given inalienable rights, and the government is there to protect them, but they don't grant them to you in the first place. So this freedom from tyranny is why they designed this system to exist. It's why we live in a democratic republic and not a pure democracy. Some people may have heard that old expression, democracy is 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. A more realistic one would be, imagine me and my friend Rob are in a room with Bill Gates, and we take a vote, and Rob and I vote to take Bill Gates' money and distribute it among the 3 of us. Now, that's democratic. We took a vote. Rob and I just decided to take all of Bill Gates' money and give ourselves each a third. Again, that's a pure democracy in a nutshell. What the Electoral College forces politicians to do is, instead of banking on that will of the majority, it forces them to build coalitions among many diverse groups of constituents. It forces them to run a national campaign, since every state is important in the outcome of the election, while striving for that magical 270 electoral votes. In a pure democracy, politicians would spend all of their time and their effort in the most densely populated areas of the country. Why would a person running for president care about coal miners in West Virginia or ranchers in Montana? They wouldn't. They wouldn't have to. Do you think we would currently be seeing all of the Democratic politicians running for president at the Iowa State Fair if it was not for the Electoral College? I don't think so. By forcing politicians to win multiple states, you force them to be accountable to people from all walks of life. Politicians cannot dominate small subsections of the United States. You can't be popular in just the South or the Northeast or the Midwest or the West Coast. You have to appeal to a broad base of people. California, for example, has 40 million people. Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016 with 65 million votes. If you dominated California, New York, Florida, possibly one, maybe 2 other states, you might win an election in a pure democracy while only winning 4 states. Is that truly representative of what people in the United States want as a whole if you win just 4 states? As our favorite rapping founding father said, quote, "Talents for low intrigue and the little arts of popularity may alone suffice to elevate a man to the first honors in a single state, but it will require other talents and a different kind of merit to establish him in the esteem and confidence of the whole Union, or of so considerable a portion of it as would be necessary to make him a successful candidate for the distinguished office of the President of the United States." That was Alexander Hamilton, Federalist Paper number 68. So basically what he was saying is that it's possible to have a strong appeal in a small subsection of the country. It is possible to, for example, imagine a Bill Clinton type character. Incredibly popular in his state as governor. But imagine he didn't have Bill Clinton's charisma and Bill Clinton's broad appeal to people across the country. If you're just popular in Arkansas, that doesn't matter because you can't win the presidency and be popular in one state. I'm forgetting his name. The governor of, I think it is Montana actually. The governor of Montana is running for president on the Democratic side right now. And when you look at poll data of people who love him in his state, he is incredibly popular. And apparently very good at his job, but has not been able to broaden his appeal to a big coalition of people. So that idea that you can't be popular in one state and win an election is very important. Some people argue that the Electoral College is unfair because it gives smaller states unequal power. For example, for every one elector California has, they have 400,000 people. While in Montana, for every one elector, they have 100,000 people. To this argument, I respond, yes. Yes, that is actually the point. You do not want big states to be able to bully smaller states just because they have bigger numbers. It's why we have two branches of Congress in the first place. One that has equal representation for all states. So every state gets 2 senators regardless of population. And the other, which is based off of population. These are safeguards to protect the interest of people who choose to live in smaller states. The Founding Fathers believed in a balance between states' rights and federal government. Now there's an incredible debate that happened among the Founding Fathers and throughout the history of our country about the balance of power between states and federal government. It's always a lively debate, and there's always room for improvement between that power structure. But the important point to always remember is that the state you live in should have more control and more say in your life than the federal government. The federal government you shouldn't have to concern yourself with the federal government. Your state is where you choose to live. And if I choose to live in Missouri, maybe it's because I don't want to live in California. So this idea being that I choose where I want to live, and the Founding Fathers believed in the foot veto. That idea that if you don't like your state, well, you can leave. You can leave your state and go to a different state that maybe you like more. That idea being that every state was going to be its own little lab work of democracy, and we were all going to be trying to reach perfection, but that each state should have the right to choose to do that however they see fit. Now, there are certain exceptions to that, certain restrictions that need to be applied sometimes. For example, in the South, during civil rights, when the federal government stepped in and said, no, you cannot discriminate against American citizens, that's a role of the federal government. Other times, they overstep, but it's always a balance, always a debate. But this is how the Founding Fathers designed it, just so that if you choose to live in a smaller state because you want to live there, you don't have to be subjected to the whims of someone in New York just because New York City has 8 million people and the state you choose to live in has 1 million people. So Donald Trump, for example, he lost the popular vote in 2016 by 3 million votes, but he dominated the Electoral College. He won 30 states compared to Hillary Clinton, who won 20 plus Washington, D.C. He managed to cultivate a broader appeal to a more diverse range of people, and therefore the fact that Hillary Clinton won 4 million more votes in California than Donald Trump shouldn't matter. If you look at that's actually exactly where that discrepancy lies. In California, Hillary Clinton won 8 million votes in California compared to Donald Trump, who won 4 million. So when you say Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million votes, yeah, she's popular in California. Does that mean she should win the country because she won one state by a large margin? No, that's not how it works, and it's good that it doesn't work that way. Donald Trump won 30 states. That is much more than Hillary Clinton. Broader appeal. So therefore the popular vote doesn't mean anything to me. Other people tend to say that the Electoral College gives too much power to the swing states. If you can count on certain states, then politicians just worry about the ones that are going to swing the election. So an election shouldn't be won by 77,000 votes in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio. Well, that is true. Donald Trump won the Electoral College mostly through winning those states, those purple states that swung red in that election. Again, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio. The problem with that argument is that swing states change. Since 1900, 80% of states have voted between 40 and 60% for either party. So half of the time they tend to vote one way, half of the time they tend to vote the other way. Trends change over time. Voting trends in states change over time. That's just the way that it works. No state, with the exception actually of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. since 1900 has been the only state. It votes 100% Democrat in every election. It is the only state like that. Very few states are above 80% when it comes to how often they vote for one party. Most states, again, 80% of them, hover between 40 and 60%. They tend to swing one way or the other. It'll go through trends. Right now it's a big Republican concern because Texas appears that it is turning purple. And if Texas goes Democratic, well, Republicans are not going to win an election for a long time. That is for sure. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in the next election, but it is an interesting trend. It is an interesting trend to watch. But again, this is just to my point. Another way to say that is California was solidly Republican until recently as 1988. California used to be solidly Republican, and now everyone, you look at it as the biggest liberal state in the country. But, that's 30 years ago. They were solidly Republican. And so trends change. So that idea that it puts too much emphasis on the swing states, well, the swing states that are the swing states today are not going to be the swing states in 2 election cycles from now. The last benefit we're going to talk about briefly, it's not the most important reason why we have the Electoral College, but it is important. And that is that the Electoral College makes it harder for people to steal elections. So in order to, quote-unquote, game the Electoral College, you would have to fix results in specific precincts in specific states. So you'd have to know what states were going to be the swing states. You'd have to influence specific spots within that state to get the outcome that you so desired. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to just pick certain places to influence. Whereas by a pure majority rule popular vote, this leaves tremendous vulnerabilities in the system because literally every polling station in the entire country has the same effect on the national election. So the worst, most corrupt polling official in the smallest polling station in the nation can influence an election just by making a couple ballots disappear or adding a few additions of their own. It leads to a tremendous gap in the security of our elections. This idea that every single vote is going to determine the outcome of the election to the same degree. That's a lot of people think that that's the way it should be. One man, one vote. That's true. Everyone gets to vote their opinion, voice their opinion. But one man, one vote also leads to vulnerabilities, and one man, one vote also can descend into tyranny and madness. You don't want people to be able to control your life just because the majority says so. It's actually why a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Electoral College will never happen. Do you know why that is? Because to amend the Constitution requires tremendous effort, because the Founding Fathers didn't want simple majority to be able to change the way that people live their lives. You need a supermajority in Congress, and then you need 2/3 of the states to ratify the amendment before it's made into law. My numbers here are going to be a little off. I'm going to apologize in advance. I believe that there are 27 amendments to the Constitution that have been ratified and put into law. Now, this is out of what amounts to thousands and thousands of calls for amendments and legislation brought to the House for amendments. Out of the thousands and thousands and thousands of times that people have tried to amend the Constitution, it's been done 27 times in the entire history of our country. The majority of these, by the way, were done within 10 years of the Constitution being written. The Bill of Rights was not present when the Constitution was formed. It was in 1782, I believe, is when the Bill of Rights was ratified or introduced. I'd have to double check that, but I think it was 1782. But now I'm a little worried that's not right. But anyway, my point being that it wasn't present at first. So the first 10 amendments to the Constitution happened within 5 years of the Constitution. The other 17, it's taken a couple hundred years to get there. So changing the Electoral College is just not going to happen. And it's dangerous. It shouldn't happen. The Electoral College serves a purpose. We don't want to live in a pure democracy. Pure democracy is dangerous. This week I had some good questions. I'm going to address just one of them here real quick. That's all I have to say on the Electoral College, by the way. I think it's a good thing. I would absolutely love if somebody has a disagreement or a question, would like further clarification on a position, please email me. My email stuff will be at the end, but email me some questions about this. This is a cool topic. I actually enjoy discussing. So if anyone has any questions, please leave them in the comments about this. To address a question from last week that I received, again, not on this, just a random one. I actually like this question a lot too, where he was talking about, someone asked me, they said they don't understand what gerrymandering is, and could I explain it a little bit? And I would absolutely love to explain gerrymandering and how to fix it. So gerrymandering is a term that is used to describe basically how people cheat in Congress. It's basically what it is. So the census determines how the House of Representatives gets proportioned. Now what happens is the people who are in charge of the state at the time of the census get to draw the congressional districts. This is a huge problem. This is a huge problem that's led to a gigantic game that involves people just cheating the system constantly. It's not good. It's really not good. My fix, by the way, I'll tell my fix before I even explain it further. My fix is we should have a nonpartisan, independent organization that is responsible for drawing congressional districts. If you look up congressional districts in certain states, Florida being a great example, that it makes absolutely no sense how they're drawn, except that what politicians try and do is they draw, instead of having squares or trying to keep certain communities together, certain neighborhoods together, what they do is they draw these ridiculously convoluted shapes to make a congressional district that is done specifically to make sure that that congressional district votes one way in an election. So in 2010, Republicans did this as well as it's ever been done. There was a very concentrated effort by the Republican establishment to win elections, and then when they dominated the midterms, they got in control of Congress. After that census came out, they drew some of the worst congressional districts in the history of the world. It really is. It's why actually Republicans have dominated state houses for so long, because they were put in charge of the census in 2010, drew these congressional districts, and then now it makes it very difficult to beat them in elections in certain states. This is not a good thing. This actually is not democratic at all. And the people who do this should actually, they should be shamed, because it's not good to intentionally gerrymander a district so your party doesn't lose. That's not representative government. That's not what government should be. So it's a huge problem. You can't gerrymander the Senate. The Senate is done by popular vote in each state. So some people will say, well, I've heard people say this before, Republicans only won the Senate because they gerrymander the states. Well, you can't actually gerrymander Senate races. They're just a popular vote in your state. You can gerrymander the House, though, and this is the big problem. That Florida being the worst one that comes to mind, if you look up some of the congressional districts in Florida, you say the only reason it's drawn like that is to make sure Republicans don't lose in certain districts in Florida. I think it's the Florida 8th. The Florida 8th district comes to mind. I might be wrong about that, but just if you look them up in Florida, you'll know exactly the ones I'm talking about. It's just they make no sense. But a nonpartisan, independent organization, I think whoever's in charge of doing the census should also be in charge of drawing the congressional districts, again, to allow for neighborhoods and groups of individuals to be represented accordingly. No more districts that encompass an entire block and then it will be a straight line down a street to encompass 6 more blocks up here and look like a pair of barbells with 2 weights on the end and a line in the middle, and they know this area votes Republican and this area votes Republican and this area in the middle doesn't. Whether it's because this is like a high-income neighborhood and a high-income neighborhood and a low-income neighborhood, or whether it's a bit of a rural county and then you skirt along the outside of a big city and then go to another rural county that effectively vote Republican. It is shifty stuff. The Republicans have done it to perfection, which is not a good thing. It's a bad thing. But yeah, not a good thing. Gerrymandering is a plague on democracy. So we should figure out a way to fix that. Obama and Eric Holder actually are right now, that is their effort, because they saw what happened in 2010 and they have made a concentrated effort to get out in front of it for this next census that's coming out next year, to have a bigger say at the table, which is a good thing. Like I said, I think it should be nonpartisan. I think that drawing congressional districts for political lines is shameful. That was the big question I wanted to address this week. It's an interesting one. Everyone should do a little bit more reading on gerrymandering. I myself should probably do some more reading about it just to make sure I know everything that I'm talking about. Book of the week. We don't have a good book on the Electoral College. I hate to say it. You can go read the Constitution or the Federalist papers. They're always entertaining. So I'm just going to recommend one of my favorite books instead. This book right here. This is the Diving Bell and the Butterfly. This book, I don't want to spoil it. It's very short. It's only 100 and it's only 120 pages, 20-ish pages. So you can read it in a sitting. It is an amazing book. It is the true story. This man had he was 40. He had a stroke. He developed locked-in syndrome. So the only thing he could do was blink his right eye. He's fully conscious, unable to move, unable to speak. And he basically wrote this book about his experience this is before computers, so he couldn't write it with his eye. But they developed a system where someone would hold up basically like the alphabet and then scroll with a pen, and he would blink and she'd write the letter down. And he wrote this entire book like that over the course of a few months while in this locked-in syndrome. It is a memoir about his life before the stroke and his life after the stroke, and it is beautiful and it is heartbreaking. So I cannot strongly enough recommend this book. It'll probably make you cry. If you don't, you might be a monster. So go read it, go check it out. It's a pretty good one. That's where we're going to leave it this week, guys. Sorry, it actually wound up not being as brief as I thought it was going to be. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the Electoral College, maybe a little bit about gerrymandering. That's all we have to say this week. Please, everyone, if you're on Apple, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review. That is super helpful in the Apple algorithm. The better reviews you have, and I mean like physically writing a review, it's super helpful. On YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share the video, let people know. We're growing every week, so that's a good thing. Very happy about that. That's where we're leaving it. I'm Tyler Chrestman. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and I will see you next Monday.